The following week, it was as if every small, ordinary moment carried an extra weight. A weight I couldn't name. A weight I couldn't ignore. It was in the way my eyes would flick to the window without meaning to, scanning for Ethan's familiar figure. In the way my heart would give a quiet, treacherous skip if I spotted him walking Max or shoveling snow. In the way I found myself replaying his words at night, hearing them in that low, deliberate voice that seemed to carry more meaning than it should. But it wasn't just the pull toward him that unsettled me. It was the fact that I had started to notice the distance between Daniel and me. Daniel had always been steady, reliable, the kind of man who remembered to pay bills on time, who never forgot to lock the front door, who always kept his promises. But lately, maybe even before Ethan's gestures began, there had been a subtle shift. Less laughter, shorter conversations, more silence during dinners that used to feel warm and easy. I told myself it was just the stress from his job, the long hours and constant travel. But a darker thought had begun to whisper in the corners of my mind. What if it's more than that? One Saturday afternoon, while Daniel was out running errands, I was tidying the bedroom when I knocked over his work bag. Papers spilled across the floor, and as I bent to gather them, something small and silver slid out from between the folders. A hotel keycard. I froze. Daniel had told me he was in Boston for a one-day client meeting earlier that week. No overnight stay. The keycard was from a boutique hotel 2 towns over one. He had no reason to be at . My pulse thudded in my ears as I stared at it. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe he'd met a client there for lunch. Maybe he'd picked it up by accident. But the knot in my stomach told me otherwise. I put it back in his bag, my hands trembling slightly, and finished tidying up as if nothing had happened. That night, Daniel came home late. I asked no questions. He offered no explanations. We went through the motions of dinner and small talk, but my mind wasn't on him, it was on Ethan. Because somehow, when I thought about betrayal, I thought about the way Ethan had noticed me. Not just seen me, but really seen me. The way Daniel hadn't in a long time. And that thought scared me almost as much as the hotel keycard. The next day, the sky was heavy with snow clouds. I stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing a mug, when I noticed movement outside. Ethan was clearing the sidewalk in front of my house again, bundled in his jacket and gloves, his breath visible in the cold air. Without thinking, I opened the door. "You don't have to do that," I called. He looked up, a small smile on his lips. "I don't mind." "Still," I said, stepping outside, "you've already done enough." He rested on the shovel handle, watching me for a long moment before speaking. "You seem different lately." I hesitated. "Different how?" Quieter. "Like something's on your mind." I swallowed, unsure how much to say. "Maybe there is." His eyes searched mine, and for a moment, I thought he might step closer. But instead, he simply said, "If you ever need to talk, you know where I am." It should have, in an innocent offer, but the way he said it steady, certain felt like more. That night, I found myself standing at my bedroom window, staring at the faint light spilling from Ethan's kitchen. Daniel was in the living room, watching TV, oblivious. I should have turned away. I didn't. A few days later, the moment that changed everything arrived quietly. It was late evening, and Daniel had once again left for a client dinner. The snow had started falling heavily, and the wind howled through the trees. I was curled on the couch, trying to lose myself in a book, when there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, Ethan was there, holding 2 mugs of something steaming. "Hot cider," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. You looked cold, I laughed softly. You can see that from your house. Not exactly, he said, setting the mugs down on the coffee table. I just knew. We sat on the couch, the room lit only by the soft glow of a lamp. The cider was warm, spiced, and sweet. For a while, we talked about small things, about nothing. But there was a current underneath it all, pulling tighter with each passing second. At one point, he set his mug down and looked at me in a way that made my breath catch. I don't know what's going on in your life, he said quietly, but I can see you're not happy. I opened my mouth to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face. His fingers lingered, warm against my skin, and in that moment, I knew that if I leaned forward, even an inch, everything would change. But before I could decide, my phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from an unknown number. I know about you and the man next door. My blood turned to ice. Ethan's brows furrowed. What is it? I shook my head quickly, setting the phone face down. Nothing. Just a wrong number. But inside, my thoughts were spiraling. Who had sent it? What did they think they knew? And more importantly, were they watching right now? That night, long after Ethan left, I lay in bed beside Daniel, staring into the dark. Should have felt relief that nothing had happened. But instead, I felt the weight of everything unsaid. The truth about the hotel keycard, the meaning behind Ethan's gestures, the text that suggested someone was watching. For the first time in years, I didn't know who I could trust. Not my husband, not my neighbor, not even myself. Because somewhere along the way, I had stopped knowing what I truly wanted. For a few days after I found that basket on my doorstep, I told myself it was nothing. I kept repeating it in my head, as if the more I said it, the more I believe it. Just a neighbor being nice. Just a friendly gesture. Just muffins, but the truth was, something about it lingered. Not just in my mind, but in my chest like a tiny ember, refusing to burn out completely. I didn't tell Daniel. I didn't know why, exactly. Maybe because saying it out loud would make it feel more real. Maybe because a part of me was afraid of how he'd interpret it. Or maybe because I wasn't ready to admit, even to myself, that it meant more than I wanted it to. The following Friday evening, the first snow of the season began to fall. Not the heavy, blanketing kind, but the light, almost playful flakes that dance in the glow of streetlights. Daniel had been called away for an overnight business trip, something about a client meeting out of town, and I found myself curled on the couch with a blanket, sipping hot chocolate and scrolling mindlessly through my phone. It was a little after 9 when I heard a soft knock at the door. I hesitated. It was late enough that unexpected visitors weren't exactly common. Here. I set down my mug and went to the window, peeking through the curtains. It was Ethan. He was standing there in a dark jacket, his breath forming faint clouds in the cold night air. Max was nowhere in sight. I opened the door, pulling the blanket tighter around me. Hey, is everything okay? He smiled faintly. Yeah, sorry to bother you so late. I was just... He lifted the bag in his hand. I made too much soup. Figured you might like some. Soup on a snowy night. Delivered personally. My instinct was to thank him politely, take the bag, and retreat inside. That's what a sensible, boundary-respecting neighbor would do. Got something about the way he was looking at me, calm, steady, but with this almost imperceptible softness made it hard to close the door. Do you want to come in for a minute? I heard myself ask before my brain could catch up with my mouth. His smile deepened, but he didn't answer right away. For a split second, it felt like he was weighing something, measuring the meaning behind my invitation. Sure, he said finally. He stepped inside, the faint scent of cedar and winter air clinging to his jacket. I led him to the kitchen, where he set the bag down on the counter. Inside was a glass container filled with thick, steaming chicken noodle soup. You really didn't have to, I said, pulling out 2 bowls. He shrugged lightly. It's no trouble. I like cooking. And I remember you mentioning once you hate eating alone. I froze for half a second. That conversation had been months ago, a casual exchange over mailboxes when Daniel was away on another trip. I'd barely even remembered saying it. He had. I poured the soup into bowls and set them on the table. We sat across from each other. The only sounds the quiet clink of spoons and the occasional muffled hum of the heater. It felt strange. Not uncomfortable, exactly, but charged. How's work? He asked. Busy, I replied. Yours? He nodded. The same. But I like busy. Keeps me from overthinking things. I gave a small smile. And what would you overthink about? For a moment he didn't answer. He just looked at me, his eyes steady, as if he were searching for the right words or deciding whether to speak them at all. Sometimes, he said slowly, about the people you see every day, but don't really know. Something about the way he said it sent a flicker of heat through me, though I couldn't have explained why. I took another spoonful of soup, suddenly very aware of how quiet the house felt without Daniel here. We talked for a little while longer about trivial things mostly. The weather, holiday plans, how Max had a habit of stealing his socks. But underneath it all, there was something else. A pull. A thread neither of us acknowledged out loud, but both of us felt. When he finally stood to leave, he paused at the door. Thanks for letting me in, he said softly. Thanks for the soup, I replied, my voice quieter than I intended. He hesitated for half a heartbeat longer, as if there was something else he wanted to say. But instead, he gave me that small, unreadable smile and stepped out into the falling snow. I closed the door slowly, leaning my forehead against it for just a second. My pulse was steady, but my thoughts weren't. The next morning I woke to find another small note on my porch. No basket this time, just a single folded card, tucked under a smooth river stone to keep it from blowing away. You looked like you needed company last night. I'm glad I stopped by. It wasn't what he said. It was what it implied. That he had been thinking about me. That he had noticed my aloneness, even when I hadn't spoken it aloud. I should have been unsettled. I should have pulled back. But instead, I felt a spark of something I didn't want to name. Over the next week, small things began to happen. Things that, on their own, could be dismissed. But together, they began to paint a different picture. I'd find my driveway already shoveled before I even had a chance to get my boots on. A bag of my favorite coffee beans left on the porch with no note. A text from an unknown number late one evening. The moon's beautiful tonight. Thought you might want to look. I didn't have to ask who it was from. The moment it all shifted happened on a Thursday evening. Daniel was stuck late at work, and I had stepped outside to bring in the trash bins. It was colder than I expected, the wind cutting through my sweater. I was halfway back to the house when I heard his voice. Cold night for just a sweater. I turned. Ethan was standing at the edge of his driveway, hands in his pockets, me with that calm, unreadable gaze. I wasn't planning to stay out long, I said, forcing a light tone. He stepped closer, not enough to breach the invisible boundary between our yards, but close enough that I could see the faint stubble on his jaw, the way the porch light caught in his eyes. Still, he murmured, you should take better care of yourself. It was such a simple statement, but the way he said it low, almost like a suggestion meant only for me, sent a ripple through me. "I do," I said, though my voice didn't sound as certain as I wanted it to. His lips curved into the faintest smile. "I know you do, but sometimes it's nice to let someone else care too." For a moment the world felt strangely still. The wind quieted. The cold didn't matter. There was just that space between us, charged and unspoken. Then Max barked from somewhere inside his house, and the moment broke. "Good night," he said, stepping back. "Good night," I replied, though my pulse was still unsteady. That night, lying in bed beside Daniel's sleeping form, I stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of it. Of him. Because somewhere between a basket of muffins and a bowl of soup, something had changed. And I couldn't tell if I was imagining it, or if Ethan knew exactly what he was doing. It had been almost 3 years since I moved into this quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where life moves slowly, and you can almost set your watch by the rhythm of the people around you. Each morning I'd hear the faint hum of Mr. Carter's lawnmower at exactly 7:30. At 8, the school bus would pull up at the corner, and the sound of children's laughter would echo down the street. By 9, the street would fall silent again until the late afternoon, when cars began trickling back into driveways and porches lit up with the golden warmth of homecomings. I had grown accustomed to it all, the quiet predictability, the familiar faces, and the casual greetings. I wasn't exactly close to my neighbors, but there was one in particular who stood out: Ethan, the man living next door. Ethan had moved in a year before me. He was in his mid-30s, tall, with a relaxed charm that seemed to naturally draw people in, not in an obvious, attention-grabbing way, but in the subtle, magnetic pull of someone who seemed comfortable in his own skin. He wasn't overly talkative, yet whenever we crossed paths, whether it was at the mailbox or while I was tending to my small garden, he'd smile in that easy, unhurried way, and for some reason, it always lingered with me a little longer than it should have. In all the time I'd known him, our interactions were mostly surface level. "Good morning, nice weather today. Do you need help with those groceries?" The standard neighborly exchanges. There was never anything suggestive, never anything to make me think twice. I had a husband, Daniel, and Ethan seemed to respect that invisible boundary completely. But there were small things I noticed about him over time, little details that, without me realizing, had quietly painted a fuller picture of who he was. How he always held the door for Mrs. Green, the elderly widow across the street, even if his hands were full. How he'd take his golden retriever, Max, for long walks every evening, sometimes stopping to chat with the kids playing in their front yards. How he'd shovel not only his driveway in winter, but the sidewalks of anyone who might have a harder time doing it themselves. Still, for all his quiet kindness, Ethan remained something of a mystery to me. I never saw anyone visit his house regularly, never heard voices or music coming from inside. His life seemed private, self-contained. It was a Wednesday afternoon, in late autumn, when something shifted, though at the time, I didn't know it yet. That day had been unremarkable in every way. I had spent the morning working from home, the dull hum of my laptop filling the kitchen as I typed away on a report I had been putting off for weeks. Outside, the wind rattled the last stubborn leaves clinging to the trees. The sky was heavy, with that muted grey tone that makes the world feel smaller. Quieter. Around 3 o'clock, I decided to take a break and step outside for some fresh air. I wrapped myself in a light sweater and wandered to the small garden in front of my house, mostly to check on the last of my marigolds before the frost claimed them. That's when I saw Ethan. He was kneeling by the hedge that separated our yards, wearing a dark flannel shirt and jeans, his hands gloved as he trimmed the overgrown branches on his side. Max was lying a few feet away, head resting on his paws, watching him work. We exchanged the usual smiles. "Hey," I called softly, leaning slightly on the fence post. "Hey," he replied, looking up briefly before returning to the branches. "Trying to get this done before winter really sets in." I nodded. "You're more prepared than I am. I think I've given up on pretending my garden still has life in it." He chuckled, that low, easy laugh I'd heard a few times before. "I can help you with that. If you want. I mean, I've got some tools you could use." I shook my head. "It's fine. I think I'll just let nature win this round." That might have been the end of it, just another small exchange to file away in the mental scrapbook of neighborly conversations. But something about the way his eyes lingered on me for a moment made me feel aware, not in a bold or obvious way, but like there was something unspoken in the air, some faint undercurrent I hadn't felt before. Still, I brushed it off. Maybe I was imagining it. The next few days followed their usual rhythm. Work, dinner with Daniel, quiet evenings reading or watching TV. Ethan and I crossed paths once or twice more, each time exchanging a wave or a brief word. Nothing unusual, nothing worth noting. But then one small, almost forgettable moment began the slow unraveling of everything I thought I knew. It happened on a Sunday morning. Daniel had left early to meet a friend for golf, and I had decided to take a slow walk to the cafe a few blocks away. The air was crisp, the kind that makes you pull your scarf a little tighter, and the neighborhood was still half asleep. As I stepped outside, I noticed something by my front door. A small basket, neatly wrapped in clear cellophane, tied with a thin burgundy ribbon. Inside, there were fresh-baked muffins, a jar of homemade jam, and a small folded note. My first thought was that it must be from one of the neighborhood committees. Sometimes they left welcome baskets for new residents, though I wasn't new anymore. But when I picked it up and unfolded the note, my stomach gave the faintest twist. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. "Thought you might like these on a chilly morning. No reason. Just because. Ethan. It was such a small gesture, so seemingly harmless that it shouldn't have meant anything. Neighbors give each other things all the time. But something about the way it was done quietly, without ringing the doorbell, without the casual "here you go," and a smile made it feel different, almost intimate. I stood there for longer than I should have, holding that basket, staring at the note. Why me? Why now? And why in a way that almost felt like it was meant to be a secret? I told myself not to overthink it. I placed the basket inside, made myself a coffee, and tried to focus on the book I had been reading. But I couldn't stop glancing at it, couldn't stop thinking about the deliberate choice behind each piece inside. The kind of muffins I had once mentioned in passing were my favorite, the specific jam that happened to be from a local farmer's market only open on Saturdays. The ribbon neatly tied like it mattered. When Daniel came home later, I didn't mention it. I told myself it was because it was nothing, just a neighbor being thoughtful. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the full truth. Because for the first time since I'd met Ethan, I realized I was beginning to notice him in a way I hadn't before.